Well, greetings, everyone. My
Hello.
name is Annie Smith, and I am on the board of directors at the Spiritual Life Center in Hartford. I am also an intern in the center's Spiritual Companion Formation Program and a graduate of the Master's Program in Religious Studies at Hartford International University for Religion and Peace. I'm happy to welcome you to tonight's program called Old God, New God, Part 2 with our presenter, Dr. Ilia Delio. This program is made possible by the generous support of the Forum for Life and Meaning. The Forum is part of the partnership between Hartford International University and the Spiritual Life Center. The Forum provides funding for events such as lectures, seminars, retreats, discussion groups, and pilgrimage to sacred places. All interested persons are welcome, whether affiliated with a spiritual tradition or not. No matter where you are on life's journey, you are invited to the programs of the Forum for Life and Meaning. Now I invite the Reverend Oscar Brockmeyer to introduce our speaker.
My name is Oscar Brockmeyer, and I've been connected with the Spiritual Life Center for about 30 years and benefited immensely from its many programs. And over the last 4 years, I've also been privileged to serve a number of students at the university by giving spiritual companioning or running groups, teaching workshops, and so forth. Before I introduce Ilia to you, I invite you to join in a moment of contemplative silence. Thank you. Dr. Ilia Delio is a Franciscan sister of Washington, D.C., and a theologian specializing in the areas of science and religion. She has interests in evolution, physics, and neuroscience, and the importance of these for theology and spirituality. Ilia holds 2 doctorates, one in pharmacology from Rutgers, and a second in historical theology from Fordham University. Following graduation from Fordham, Ilia taught science and religion at Trinity College here in Hartford, and she's also worked at the Washington Theological Union and Georgetown University. Ilia currently holds the Josephine C. Connolly Endowed Chair in Theology at Villanova University. She's the author of over 20 books and is the founder of the Center for Christogenesis. Dr. Delio is a deeply spiritual scholar of theology and science, a prophetic voice, and a wonderful teacher. I've heard from a number of people who attended the session last week, and the response has been completely positive. We're in for another treat this evening. So welcome, Ilia.
Thank you, Oscar, and thank you, Annie, for the opening and for the lovely introduction, and thank you all for being here to kind of continue this conversation. So if you remember last week, I was trying to put forth our shift that we've been in over the last 500 years, really, from a supernatural God to, you might say, a natural God, or a God who is entwined, entangled with our lives. And I want to continue that discussion this week, but I want to broaden it out a little bit in terms of Carl Jung's idea of individuation, the fact that, we've kind of missed the mark with regard to religion and technology. So I want to talk a little bit about technology this evening. And the way Teilhard de Chardin brought these, what seems to be like various or almost opposing ideas together into his vision of evolution and what we might focus on, especially in these times that we're living in. I do think that despite the political turmoil and some of the tragic loss of jobs, there's something that's taking place right before our eyes, and I wonder, like, do we really grasp what's going on here? And it's kind of scary, quite honestly. But I also think that there may be a way forward for us. So let's see if I can share my slides, and we can begin this story. Let's see, I did have slides here someplace. Oh, here they are. Can you see the slides? Well, let me put it on the slideshow, and that might be helpful. Can you see that? Can you see the slides? Very good.
Yes.
So I entitled this evening Personalization and Planetization. And it goes hand in hand, these terms go hand in hand with the new God, a God who is the power of life at the heart of life, becoming ever new. And, Teilhard recognized in the mid-20th century, he thought that Christianity had become like a ship out to sea. It had lost its moorings to the earth. And he said, people are looking for a religion of humankind and of the earth, which gives meaning to human achievements, a religion that will kindle cosmic and human evolution and a deep sense of commitment to the earth. If we heeded these words 100 years ago, we may not be in the predicament we're in today. But needless to say, Teilhard was not well received. In fact, he was rather rejected. So here we are. Now, as the more I study Teilhard, the more I realize what not just a novel thinker, a radical thinker. And to me, he's someone who represents what Christian life really is. It's an adventure into this mystery of God. And what he came to realize is that Christianity is not so much normative of all religion. He certainly didn't expect everyone to become a Christian or a Catholic. In fact, he spoke about Christianity in terms of evolution because he thought Christianity holds out, this union of divinity and humanity and cosmic life. He thought these are the very fundamentals of evolution itself. There's an ineffable power at the heart of life, and it's pulling and pushing life into more life. So in his view, Christianity fulfills an essential function in evolution. I think that's such an interesting insight that would really radically change everything about the institution of religion, which I think, well, we'll hold that conversation off. Again, just to reiterate from last week, Teilhard asks, who will give evolution its own God? And I can't tell you how many times I have seen, even among some of the Jesuits, certainly of the Dominican scholars, or, just some people out there trying to forge the old God with evolution, and trying to working it out, well, God allows everything to happen. God makes things to make themselves. And, God is okay with evolution as long as we don't get too muddied in the waters and this type of thing. And I'm like, no, God, the name God really is about the mystery of life itself. being, that I am who am. So Teilhard asks, who will give evolution its own God? And we have to answer that question if we really hope to get into or move into some type of future of life. So again, what Teilhard holds out is that God is not a static being. In fact, when we talk about God at the heart of evolution, we're talking about being that is becoming. And so he used the term theogenesis, that God, or this reality of God, is being born from within. And he said, God has become too small to nourish in us the desire to go on living and to live on a higher plane. I think that's really true. I mean, from where I sit and worship, we have sort of a mechanistic kind of worshiping God, a sort of a God who's there for us, who protects us. We go to God as a source of, comfort or, guidance. But, in a sense, we don't have a sense that God is longing to become something more in us. And that's what Teilhard recognized. And he said, science now tells us that the cosmos has become a cosmogenesis. The cosmos itself is in a birthing process. And he said, this fact alone must lead to the profound modification of the whole structure, not only of our thoughts, but of our beliefs. And so I find it rather alarming that we have prayers and doctrines and dogmas from the 5th century to the 16th century, as if time never changed, as if space-time never happened. But, what Teilhard recognized as he began to reflect on this God of evolution, that God is entangled. Entanglement, so just to kind of refresh our memories, entanglement is a term that comes from the physics, quantum physics, where particles that have interacted are forever interacting. And we might, think of this entanglement with God as we have always been entangled in the mystery of divine love. And that being, might say separated by that love, by our earthly lives, separated insofar as we come into created existence. It means that we are never far from God and God is never far from us, that we are always or forever intertwined with this divine reality. And so this entanglement meant for Teilhard that God is not just the creator of the world. In fact, he did not use the language of creator at all in his writings. He rather said that God is in creative union. Now, creative union is a different type of relationship insofar as it's unitive. One enters into a relationship. And that's what he was trying to, in a sense, highlight, is that God is the very relationship of, of the becoming itself. So God and world, he says, form a complementary whole. That God cannot be God apart from the world. How could we possibly know God without the world? I mean, it's inconceivable. And we can't know God even apart from human consciousness. So there's something that is irreducible about us. That's sort of the condition for God's own existence. And that, we've had this idea that sort of God has been God and would be God even without us. I'm not sure how we can make that statement, but we do. So we have this idea that, that God has been this perfect being, and whether or not we existed, God would exist, but we can never really, make that statement, but here we are. So Teilhard says, God and the world are in process together. What does that mean for us? That's really our question. I think we have up till now not lived this, and we have lived a type of religious sensibility where God is some kind of overarching mystery or an indwelling mystery or something that is beyond us, within us. We're not sure exactly how to frame it. But here we have more of a deep personal being in creative union with being itself. And so there is a deep personal relationship that is in a developmental process of becoming. And that's rather interesting, I think, and exciting. Now, Teilhard did not write a lot about, in fact, he wrote almost nothing about Jesus of Nazareth, quite honestly, because he did not see the Christ as simply the logos or, Jesus as Jesus Christ as the early church. For him, the Christ is much more like the logos or the ordering principle. The Christ is a cosmic reality. And that cosmic reality, in his view, did become, you might say, revealed or incarnate in Jesus of Nazareth. But Jesus, for Teilhard, is an element in the process. Jesus does not exhaust the Christ. So Jesus may be the Christ, but the Christ is more than Jesus, as Raymond Panikar said. And he posited that there's something just as theogenesis, that God is becoming. Now God is becoming something in us. So Christogenesis. The Christ here meaning we can interpret it as God's, plan, God's reign, peace and justice, hope for the earth, planetary wholeness, however we might conceive of what God or what we anticipate or what Scripture holds out as God's promise for this planet and for life on Earth. Teilhard also thought that, again, the Christ is more cosmic, or is as least as much cosmic as Christ is human. And he said he spoke of a third nature of Christ. So if anyone knows the doctrine of Chalcedon, divine and human natures, well, Teilhard goes beyond that doctrine, and he speaks of divine, human, and cosmic natures, which means if Christ is part and parcel of the cosmos, related organically to the cosmos, then Christ is in evolution, just as the cosmos itself is in evolution. And therefore, he speaks of Christ in his third nature as the prime mover of the evolving universe. Now that's quite interesting, and I hope you'll appreciate what Teilhard is really getting at here. He's saying that there's a personal someone at the heart of evolution. It's moving it along, this whole process, this immense process of natural life into something more personal, more centered, more present. So he speaks of Christ as Christ the Evolver and Christ Omega. And he sees then that whatever Christianity holds out in terms of its doctrines of creation, incarnation, and redemption, he says, well, these are actually three aspects of the one unifying process of ongoing evolution. Something is constantly coming into being, divinity is rising up in a new way, and things are becoming more and more united. So we humans are, in a sense, the thinking portion of this universe. We emerge from this long process, but there's something distinct about us. We have self-reflective consciousness. We can know the very process that allows us to know, and that's pretty remarkable. But it also means our choices and how we think about ourselves, looking ahead, makes a significant difference to how this process will proceed. Now, what Teilhard recognized in terms of this Christic reality, or what he called the Christic, he put it in a form of a poem. He said, a being was taking form in the totality of space, a being with the attractive power of a soul, palpable like a body, as vast as the sky, a being which mingled with things yet remained distinct from them, a being of higher order than the substance of things with which it was adorned, yet taking shape within them. Its mystery. The rising sun was being born in the heart of the world. God was shining forth from the summit of that world of matter, whose waves were carrying up to him the world of spirit. Teilhard is a mystic, and so he sees God entwined in matter itself, and yet rising from matter in what? In the form of love, in the form of a greater spirituality. Now, just kind of to switch gears a little here, because I think what Teilhard really was trying to get at, and Teilhard was not a trained theologian. So what we don't have from him are sort of the philosophical background to help kind of structure his theology. But his insights were deep, and I think they were very not just apropos for what the truth of Christianity is, but apropos of the world that we now live in. Just so you know, Carl Jung and Teilhard de Chardin were in dialogue for some period of their time. Carl Jung had Teilhard's The Human Phenomenon on his night table and would read it periodically, and wrote to Teilhard that he really was very in agreement with a lot of his ideas. And I think Carl Jung helps. He sort of, I don't say he corrects Teilhard, but he adds to Teilhard's vision. And here's how Jung conceived of what he read from the New Testament. From the Old Testament to the New Testament, he writes that the many gods become one God. The one God becomes human. Every human is to become God. Now, that part actually is written right into the doctrine of Nicaea. It's God became human so that the human could become God. We've never really taken up that seriously, but Carl Jung did, and he went on to say that religion is a natural process of individuation. So I just want to, and I'll cover these 2 points in a bit. What Carl Jung saw is very much what Teilhard saw, that religion, as most of the Western world has known it, has ended. By that, what they're saying is religion prior to the axial period, or prior to the rise of, when we say modern religion, I'm going to take the last 2,000 years actually as modern religion in terms of the scale of human evolution. If you go back to thousands of years, when some of the indigenous spiritualities emerged, religion was the vitalization of life. Religion permeated all aspects of life. It was how people govern their politics, their sociality, their culture. Religion was it was an energy of deep relationship, of spirituality between the earth, the skies, the human community, and everything else. That world ended with the rise of axial consciousness and the axial person, when we became individuals with a sense of self-transcendence, a sense of autonomy, a sense of oneness, that we don't really need other people around us to be ourselves. And that's basically a Western phenomenon, much more than other parts of the world. And so a lot of what Jung and Teilhard are critiquing really is Western Christianity and Western religion. Jung proposed that the transition or evolvement from the ego toward the self as the stabilizing center personality has indeed produced the modern man. This is axial, the axial period, or the axial person. But here's what's so interesting, and I think we need to give this new attention, that religion is not something that sort of, comes from God in some supernatural way, or it's a grace that's built on nature. Religion is a natural process of evolution itself, and it's a natural process of individuation. And so what Carl Jung realized, what Teilhard realized, that humanity's relation to divinity lay in its relation to the unconscious, or the cosmic plenum, as the ground of consciousness and meaning. And here, therefore, the word God here is referring to that ground of being itself, or the ground of consciousness. And what Jung realized, what Teilhard said, God needs humankind to become both whole and complete. That point, we still don't get it. We don't understand what that means for us. What does it mean to say God needs humankind to become whole and complete? And what Jung thought is that through human consciousness, God acquires a greater sense of beingness precisely through our awareness. And therefore, again, God and humanity are in this entangled state, so that the reality of each is bound up with the other. As God and humanity become more unified, God becomes more God, and the human becomes more deeply human as person. So in Jung and Teilhard's view, the evolution of God and the evolution of humanity cannot be separated. But we have separated them. And that, to me, is one of our greatest gaps, if not chasms. So this theogenesis that both of our scholars or thinkers propose is that God and human are to be united in human consciousness as the depth meaning of history, both personal and collective. And this is what redemption is. It's redemptive. In other words, we in a sense, if I could put it this way, we kind of save God from being God and to become the God or the living power, at the heart of life. God is something like an idol most of the times, or we're not sure what to do. We know God is somehow reality, but we don't know that God as the power of life itself, and therefore the wellspring of infinite possibility. So this theogenesis is a co-redemption of the divine and human. We save God and God saves us in this historical process. And this is where now Carl Jung's ideas on the Christ become quite interesting, because he did not think that Jesus Christ saved us from sin or anything of that. He did not see Christ as Savior. In fact, he saw Christ as, if anything, an incomplete figure, because in a sense, Christ did not really fully undergo, I guess, that challenge into the darkness of human weakness or human ill. But in any event, Jung thought that Christ sort of held out the ideal of the self. He kind of is a model. Insofar as if you look at the New Testament, there is something about Jesus that comes to kind of a breakthrough in consciousness, kind of a psychic totality within him. But Jung says without integration of evil, there is no totality. In other words, the Christ can only emerge when we, in a sense, recognize the darkness of God within ourselves, reconcile ourselves with that darkness, and therefore, in a sense, retrieve God out of the chaos that is deep within us into kind of a more full or united personal self. So this goal of psychological and biological development for Jung is self-realization, or the process of individuation, which he sees took place in Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus of Nazareth did come to this self-realization or individuation. And therefore, this is what Carl Jung proposes to us, that consciousness must be brought into the unconscious darkness. And I know, many of you have been involved in spiritual direction. So this is probably not unfamiliar to you at all. This idea of facing our darknesses, our fears, our judgments, whatever it is within us that blocks that fullness of divine reality from breaking through. That's what we must, in a sense, reconcile. That's the place of redemption, and that's the place of reconciliation, whereby we become individuated insofar as we become truly person, truly relational, and therefore on our way to wholeness. So Jung, again, probably many of you might know this stuff, but Jung speaks about the levels of the psyche, the level of consciousness, the level of unconsciousness, where Freud's concept of complexes or emotionally toned ideas, the shadow side of us, and then this collective unconsciousness, which is sort of a plenum, a fullness of what I might think of a quantum field of possibilities. So it might look like this, that our outer world, of our persona is, in a sense, the place where the ego expresses itself. But that ego, in a sense, must be, in a sense, reconciled with what is whatever within us. And of course, we're very, very complex people. We are neither animal nor angel. We are the most complex species really alive. And we have layers within layers within layers. And for Jung, this consciousness, this outer layer of consciousness is a very complex phenomenon of the human. It is more like a field force that operates both within our minds, within our bodies, and everything around us. So we might seem conscious, but there's a level of unconsciousness that we're constantly surrounded with as well. And then we're part and parcel and participating in a collective unconscious. And this inner world for Jung needs to, in a sense, be fully aligned with who we are as persons. It's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time deal by any means. But that's what he means by this process of individuation. It's a self-realization, sort of a breakthrough. And what I see in Jesus of Nazareth is a breakthrough in consciousness, whereby the person who is individuated, who becomes truly person, truly alive in oneself as relational, as deeply personal, but one who has the courage to be. I think the person who is at home with oneself has the courage to live life and therefore lives in freedom. And that freedom, therefore, gives one the, you might say, the invitation to do new things, to act spontaneously, to counter the forces of resistance, to think in novel ways, in creative ways, in unimaginable ways. So again, this process of individuation, of becoming person, it is really part and parcel of both Jung and Teilhard de Chardin's paradigms. I think this rule, the psychological rule, is very important, especially in our own time, that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That's a really important idea, that what is not, in a sense, brought to our awareness is acting within us in an unaware way, but we react to it by the way we act in the world. And so when the individual remains divided within and does not become conscious of one's inner opposite, the world must then act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. And I think what we find today, among many other things, is we have deeply, deeply disconnected personhood, sort of the unraveled person, where there's deep levels of unconscious darkness that has not been reconciled, and it is acted out in means of violence, in the way we treat one another as objects, for replaceable objects, and etc. So this theogenesis means that there's no God who's going to save us from the outside. And I worry sometimes today and I understand people's need and desire to pray for some kind of salvation in these troubled times, but it's never going to happen like that. I think what prayer does for us, it empowers us. And I think it helps us raise to consciousness our concerns and our intentions that are deep within us. And I think that's what we mean by bringing this God to consciousness. Bring that center, that ineffable depth within us, that which holds us in all life into its ongoing movement in love, to bring that into our awareness, and then to live from that center in a conscious way in evolution. So, what Teilhard, what he was really getting at is that something is taking place here. It has been taking place now for about 4.2 billion years on life on Earth, and about 13.8 billion years in cosmic life. And, he calls this process cosmic personalization. So if we don't want to use his term Christogenesis, in other words, the whole is building up into a personalized, transpersonal formation, we can speak of cosmic personalization, meaning that connectivity is really what we're about. Thoroughly, we are thoroughly connected or relational beings through and through, so that we know that all that we do affects other wholes, and we are affected by other wholes as well. We are wholes within wholes within wholes, and whether or not we're aware of it, everything we're thinking and doing is affecting the whole of other wholes. So Teilhard is trying to bring this together, and he says he came across the computer in 1950, and he thought this is the next stage of evolution. The computer, he thought, could link minds together. We certainly have maxed out biological evolution, and therefore the next stage of evolution will not be biological. It will be on the level of mind. So he says the success of humanity's evolution will not be determined by our by survival of the fittest, but by our own capacity to converge and unify. So we are on a new level of evolution as we speak. We know this evolution, and I don't know how we feel about it, but it's our reality. And as we spoke last week, we went from the cell phone in the hand to the computer in the hand, and probably in 5 to 10 years, all this stuff is going to be completely obsolete. We're going to have implantable chips. We might be biohacked. We will have a kind of networked world that is perhaps unimaginable to most of us at this point. I think, and I want to talk a little bit about technology, because we are living right now through one of the major technological revolutions, and it's about to change everything about us. For one thing, I think we need to get over the fear of technology. Nature has always been technological. Beavers build dams, ants build ant hills. That's what nature does. Nature finds the tools to optimize what it needs for life to be successful and to live in a flourishing way. So I don't find technology anything other than nature doing nature's thing. And that is part and parcel of what we spoke about the last time, that we're simply a species in evolution. We are unfinished. We are being created as we create, and life is constantly moving towards newness, whether or not we want to move there with it. But what moves life best and what moves it most is creative power. And I think from the side of religion, we sort of have lost this reality of our biological lives. And, if you want to say, well, where does our technological revolution start? It starts in the mid-20th century, where we had a number of things going on, including fascism, communism, World War I, World War II, the death of God movement. The kind of, on the Catholic side, it was the ultramontanist, everything has to follow the Pope and the church because we are the word of God. All of this stuff gave rise to unbridled power, in a sense that, nuclear bomb, if you ever seen the movie Oppenheimer, was indeed sort of a turning point. I think, Oppenheimer and we realized for the first time we have an unbelievable power in our hands to annihilate this entire earth at the drop of a bomb. And that, I think, put us in a different framework. Will we make it into the future or not? So computer technology emerged in 1950, right at the end of the Korean War, this Cold War period. And it was really a British cryptologist by the name of Alan Turing who came up with this idea of the imitation game. And, and John McCarthy coined the term artificial intelligence a few years later. Turing basically asked, can a machine think like a human? That was his very simple experiment. So the Turing test put a computer in one room, a human in another room, and then an examiner in a third room. And the examiner gave the same question to the computer and the human. And if the examiner could not tell the difference in the answer between the computer and the human, the examiner would conclude that the computer was thinking like a human. That's how it begins. It's about thinking, about the mind. And from that, we began to develop an understanding of information. And it largely came through the study of cybernetics, this kind of feedback. You must have heard the term feedback loops. So we create the tools and the tools create us. It's a cybernetic pattern. And this cybernetic pattern is really what has sped up evolution in a considerable way. We entered in the 1960s in an age of cyborgs. So a cyborg is a short for cybernetic organism. It means that we exited the Homo sapiens species as we formerly knew it when all our religions grew up. And we entered into a different concept of the human person as one who is a hybrid. You know, we could put pacemakers in our hearts. We could put hearing aids in our ears. We can put eyeglasses on. So a cyborg is a hybrid of biology and device or machine. What it meant for us is that the boundaries of natural biological life are permeable. They're local. They can be changed. And that has given rise to a new understanding of the human person. We do not possess a stable form. And we see this today, actually, with the whole discussion around gender fluidity and gender plurality, the way human personhood is taking on all new identities. So the cyborg signals the end of a certain type of person as autonomous, possessing a self distinguished from the rest of nature by rational free will. Religion, if I might say this, is still with the old concept of the human person. Technology is with the post-human or the cyborg life. So whenever we talk about human between technology and religion, I don't think we're always talking about our same understanding of the human. So basically, biological essentialism is over. We now know that biology can be, the lines of biology can be erased, they can be changed, but it's changing the way we think about ourselves in relation to one another and the world in which we live and how we think about ourselves, period. So here's the bottom line to this, that what counts as a human is not self-evident. And I know that's hard. It's really kind of shocking when you think about this, because we're pretty sure we know what human is. I mean, we experience ourselves as human. But actually, if we take note of how we are shifting, especially as we look at younger generations and across the spectrum of changes, we will see that cyborg life is indeed the life that we are now in. And we are in a process of what we call cyborgization. So it's not just that we're cyborgs, we're in what we call an iterative process. It's a process that keeps increasing. So if we started out with eyeglasses and hearing aids, we're soon going into Fitbits and then biohacking, where we'll eventually, according to Elon Musk and his Neuralink, we'll have chips implanted in our brains that will link us to everything from the Federal Reserve to, you know, everyone around the world. Now, I know this is scary. I'm just telling you where this might be going. To a total fusion of biology and technology, which is how a lot of transhumanists look toward the future, the near future of technology. So we cyborgs are probably part and parcel of this milieu, but certainly younger generations, it is their milieu. So the iPhone is not just a device to use to call anyone, because no one speaks on the phone. It's an exoskeletal self. It's the self that's extended into a device that is, you might say, the mechanical self. And so we're kind of in a digital dualism. As Sherry Turkle said in Alone Together, we are in a process of making one another disappear by living more of our lives apart from humans and in the company of machines. And so, you know, that too is a little bit of the problem today. We're actually more fractured, even though we're more connected than ever before. And I often ask myself, how did we get here? How did we allow this to happen with no kind of guide or we're knowing where we're going with this stuff? Nicholas Carr says that we're just becoming shallow. We're just losing our capacity to think. We're losing creativity. We're just algorithms reduced to information. And we're involved in so much information. You know, I was just reading I don't know if you remember Alvin Toffler's book, 1970, Future Shock. You know, we're overloaded. You know, you're probably overloaded by now with all these ideas, right? Because it's come upon us in such a way we can't process it anymore. And so it kind of, you know, lends itself to the predicament we find ourselves in today. I often wonder, and here's what's interesting here. How did we get here? Like, what is it about technology that has sucked us in so quickly, like a vacuum cleaner? And it's so alluring. I guarantee you, most young people would prefer being on their devices than being in a church or in some kind of spiritual community. There's something about cyberspace that is infinite possibilities of something out there for me. Scholars, you know, posit that cyberspace now fills a psychological and religious void in modern life, that we look to our devices for what is our deepest religious and spiritual needs. This is just a painting by Brett Robinson, kind of to bring home the picture. This is by Robert Perrotta, rather. This is from Robinson's Appletopia, where Appletopia is about Apple Corporation as a new religion. It's really an interesting book. But this painting is sort of iconic of our times. So here's Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Corporation. This is the birth of the Mac as the new savior. We have Andy Warhol, the prophet of postmodernity, and Walter Cronkite, who is telling the good news, and John Lennon, imagine there's no heaven. So you can see where technology now becomes, in a sense, the new savior. It's the new incarnation, the birth of the Mac. And therefore, kind of pointing out that technology has become not just simply a tool to connect us, it's become our new metaphysics. It's where we, in a sense, seek out the sacred, the spiritual, and our deepest concerns. So, you know, what many transhumanists will say is technology fulfills what religion promises. Religion has failed. That's basically the bottom line here. Religion is old, it's outdated, it has failed, it doesn't move us, it doesn't empower us to be creative. And therefore technology has ushered in. And here we are, artificial intelligence. And if you read the news today, it's really all over the place. This is what's happening. Transhumanism, the idea to perfect the human by means of technology. Everything from super intelligence to extended life to digital immortality. And post-human, the reconfiguration of the human in relation to an electronic complex. So this might be a lot, but I just want to make you aware of these things, because when I read, you know, Musk's the Department of, Government Efficiency, that is, in a sense, what they're planning. It's a transhumanist political takeover where, in a sense, we will dismantle. Technology works by disrupting systems and then innovating new ones. That's how it works. You break down what is because it no longer works, and then you put, you put whatever you have in mind as the new. And this is what transhumanists claim, that we have to wrest our biological destiny from evolution's blind process of random variation. We can use science and technology to overcome our biological limits. We can use science and technology to get whatever we want. Is that true? I don't know. I doubt it. Ray Kurzweil says, given enough time, say for Kurzweil, 20 more years, we'll be able to download our brains. We won't even die anymore. So resurrection will take on a new meaning. Hans Moravec says we can upload our brains. So we might have, brain chips. We'll have digital software, mind files, mind clones. It gets really imaginative. So all this to say is, some marry technology with Christianity, salvation by techno life. What else can we say? When the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the dead are at least virtually alive. New Testament, technology, are together. And these are some of the movies that if you haven't watched them, you really should. They're very insightful on this is Blade Runner, Transcendence, Her. They're dealing with, a lot of these movies are dealing precisely with religious themes, with humanity, what is happening to us, and, what are we about fundamentally? So the post-human is where a lot of us are today, believe it or not. Although we may seem autonomous and have some sort of personal agency, we really are in a deeply entwined and interconnected environment with our technologies. So as Catherine Hale says in The Post-Human, there's just no essential differences between body and computer, cybernetic mechanism, biology, robot technology, and human goals. The end, she says, the human, as we have known it, has come to a close. Now, all of this, that was a little foray through technology, because Teilhard lived on the cusp of what he could see with technology. And the reason I'm only sharing this with you is that we religious people, or people in spirituality, have not really adequately embraced what technology means for us philosophically, spiritually, and religiously. We have sort of left it on the sidelines, like, oh, that's something, we have to use, but I'm not really interested in it. And I think this actually we have created the conditions precisely for a technological takeover. And it's really sad. It didn't have to be this way, but here we are. I think if we could get our heads around what Teilhard was saying, that it might be helpful. He is saying that we're, from out of biogenesis, we're on a new level of mind, noogenesis. And this level of evolution is occurring quite rapidly. But Teilhard also, he never used this language entirely, but this is what it means to be empowered by God. We are created co-creators. We do have a task in this unfinished universe to help bring it to a fulfillment, to build it up in whatever we hope in. What is our vision? What is our ultimate value, our ultimate concerns? That's the question we need to ask, not only personally, but collectively. Teilhard thought that the computer could indeed bring us to a new level of shared planetary life. He thought interthinking humanity is sort of a new type of organism whose destiny it is to realize new possibilities for evolving life on this planet. This is not how Musk and others think about technology today. They think in terms of power, and you might say a new type of world power. But Teilhard thought in terms of planetization, that the computer could actually link us together in a new whole. I'm sorry about all the print, but I just want to briefly, when I speak about the third story of the universe, it's because we have moved from the first story where our religious narratives were born. We moved through the second story where science was born, and we're in a new story. And it might be better just to put it in this short slide. The first story involved our worldviews grounded in myth and ritual, pre-scientific. The second story is our worldview built on science, the laws of nature, Newton's laws, and the scientific revolution. The third story, so in this story, God was present. In this story, no God was present. The third story says we need the spirituality of the first story to be entwined with the science of the new story in order for the third story to proceed, you might say, in a meaningful way. So the third story is an attempt to envision a worldview that integrates meaning, purpose, and ethical dimension of the first story, logic, with the universality, clarity of method, and applicability in the second story. So the third story is where we find ourselves right now. And it's really bringing science and religion into a unified field of knowledge. And that's what Teilhard recognized. He said, look, technology is actually, this is an evolutive plus for us. It's a forward movement of spiritual energy. Technology can help maximize consciousness, and it complexifies relationships. We are in a globalized world precisely because of technology and not despite it. That's the amazing thing. So this is, in a sense, what Teilhard anticipated. Technology has afforded us a global brain. We can actually link ourselves around this globe in a way that we could actually think together, you might say, and share whatever our hopes are together in a new way. This actually here, this image on the right comes from the mapping of information across systems. And when you map information, what you find is that things are actually getting more, when we say convergence, they're more unified. It doesn't appear that way, but the mapping of information actually shows greater complexity, greater unification. And therefore, while it looks like things are falling apart, they're actually getting better on some levels. But we need other values to help move this into a realized whole. And that's why Teilhard said religion and science are not separate disciplines. The fact that we even separated these disciplines created two distinct systems of knowledge and act as if they don't have nothing in common has been a tremendous deficit for the planet. He says they are two phases of the one and the same act of complete knowledge, and the only one which can embrace the past and future of evolution so as to fulfill them. Without science, religion is blind, and without religion, science is lame. They need each other. So basically, that's what Teilhard is saying. Religion's necessary. It's like a soul. Religion is like the energy. It's like the ligament. It's what pulls us. The spirituality of being pulled into something of ultimate meaning, ultimate concern. But science is the world in which we live in. And science, however, is also runs on spiritual principles. I mean, the scientist is passionate about discovery, is longing to discover something. So the seeker is one who devotes oneself through love to the labors of discovery. All this to say is, what Teilhard basically said is the spiritual forces science claims to dispense with are the same forces that drive scientific research. So we've got to get over this little gap between science and religion and realize and find a new way to think about religion in a scientific age and to think about science as, you might say, part and parcel of religion itself. And this is what Teilhard said. They belong together. They energize and activate one another when we can build the earth together. So we have a lot of science, and religion is sort of, it's hard to locate it in the world today. Science is it's clear. We send rocket ships to the moon. We invent, biomedicines. But what Teilhard is saying is that science without religious aims, the aims of what? The values of justice, the values of shared life. You might say the values of we're oriented towards something. We might call it the fullness of love, whatever it is. But we need an integrated development between these two disciplines. Teilhard also realized that not all directions are good for us. One alone, he says, leads upwards. That through which increasing organization leads to greater synthesis and unity. He says, our hope can only be realized if it finds its expression in greater cohesion and in greater human solidarity. That's our litmus test. Are we becoming more cohesive together because of technology? Are we in greater human solidarity, or are we more fragmented? Do we find ourselves more conflicted? So for Teilhard, technology extends the outreach of human activity, but it depends on how we control its psychic and spiritual powers. So we have allowed technology because we treated it as something outside our domain of interest. And so we've not had an active voice in how to use technology, how to develop technology. What do we want with technology? And so I find now we're in a massive technological revolution, and it's kind of a future shock. We're not sure now what will happen with digital currency and, remade political systems. And is there a way forward? And I absolutely think there is. If I thought that, technology was going to have the last word on us, I'd give up what I'm doing. So I think, and here's the good news, and it has to do with the fact that there is an ineffable center of love, a Christic center at the heart of our lives. I think what we have failed to do, I'll just skip ahead here. This is all to say that, we're moving towards this global superorganism, or what Gregory Stock called the meta-man. This is not to be feared. It's a merging of human and machines into a global superorganism could actually be for the benefit of the earth. Teilhard spoke about the ultra-human, which is sort of how I would like to think of our next phase. We can become more being, more life, more love, more justice. The moreness of life is, in a sense, what technology can, if we use it correctly, bring us to. So his idea of planetization. Can we planetize? Can we develop a planetary community that includes, all Earth life? A created reality integrated to a God who wants to become ever more God at the heart of this life. But here's what Teilhard said. Planetization, if we are to become more whole, then he says it requires a hyper-personalization. That means the inner universe drives the outer universe. And here's where I do think religion can play a vital role today. And here's what I just kind of want to emphasize is, first of all, we need a major religious revolution in terms of we have to do what technology has done. We have to be innovative religious thinkers and spiritual leaders. We have to tap into our imagination. We have to be creative as spiritual people. We're too passive. We're too passively recipients of everything. And because it's almost like we have to receive God. But what if, in a sense, we are, in a sense, what God wants to become? And so we have to act as if we have a godly power, an unlimited power. And if we married that unlimited power with the values, say, of the New Testament or of a tradition, most religious traditions, holding out for us compassion, to be radically compassionate. What does that look like? What kind of systems might we put in place for that, And that's where I see that Teilhard, brought together mysticism and evolution. It's not blindly moving into this technological world like, okay, I'm going to get a better computer. It's that there's something driving this whole process. And it is really the mind. It's that place of consciousness. Teilhard thought that consciousness is the primary driver of evolution. Jesus, where your mind is, there your treasure lies. Or as the Buddha says, our minds create the world, not the other way around. Our minds are all over the place, quite honestly. They're probably exhausted by now. But, the fact is that our mind, and I don't mean the mind like, in the little brain. I mean the mind as a field of existence. It's everything from our spiritual energies, our psychological energy, our emotional life, are just our bodily existence. I think of mind like a field force. And that field is unlimited in its depth and its breadth. It's what connects us to all other fields. And therefore, how do we develop that mind, in a way that individuation of personality then leads us into a new type of person, maybe an ultra-human type of person? So I'll just skip along here because I just have a few more slides, but I know it's a little bit after 8 o'clock. What Teilhard basically said is inner transformation escapes cosmic entropy. That's why if you're doing, meditation or centering or contemplation, you're on the right path. This is actually what is needed because as we center ourselves, we are not subject to the forces outside. We find an inner strength from within, and that helps us move then to higher levels of awareness. And that's what he thought, that we are vitally related to the dynamic universe, its formation. And what he thought is mysticism is actually the fundamental inner driving force of it, where energy expands and consciousness is maximized. So we are the new creation. That's how we should think, and that's how we should act. I think institutions sometimes hold us back and too limited. We have to be those who are participating in this act of creating. These are just some Teilhard notes. I can, all of this, basically I've said, we're not finished evolving because the universe isn't finished. God is emerging. And therefore, since we're not finished and God is not finished, the fullness of what we can be, a personality, lies ahead. So Teilhard's like, look, does religion or spirituality empower us with a zest for life? That's the term he used, a zest for life. We're basically holding on to life, It's like, have a nice day, But he thought, a higher socialization, bringing up to a greater awareness and acting from that awareness, he thought can be brought about if we have a positive belief in the value of the future. For Teilhard, it's believing in the future, believing in matter, believing in the earth, believing in the world itself. That's where faith has to be located, not in some abstract, dogma of some sort. He thought actually the creeds were too old. He said a creed or any confession of faith, its value is measured by its power of evolutive activation. I mean, does the Nicene Creed really empower us to evolve? I don't think so, since it was made in the 5th century. So what Teilhard is anticipating up ahead, and this is where we need to be thinking, a new religion of the earth. What might that look like? He says, in the future, the only religion possible is the one which will teach us in the very first place to recognize, love, and serve with passion the universe of which we form a part. Passion. Is this a pantheism? Yeah, a little bit, actually. He actually used that word. Does God get collapsed into this? No, because God is always that power of life at the heart of life, like the overflow of life itself. So, Teilhard's thing, we cannot be saved except through the universe as a continuation of it. We need to be part of what this universe is becoming in an active way and a full way. So whether we're going to become some weirded out, super intelligent, techno-robotic sapiens, or if we're going to move into a new planetary wholeness of life, well, it depends on us. Teilhard's thing is we will be saved by an option that has chosen the whole. And it must be the whole of our lives and the whole of this earth and the whole of human community and this whole cosmos, that God is that whole. And therefore God actually, that reality of God is not what's behind us, it's it's ahead of us. God is becoming God and will become God when we live in that wholeness of love. So I'm going to stop here since it's already 8:12, and that was a lot. I figured since it's my second night with you, and I will not be with you for a third night. So those were 3, major areas. and maybe we could just take some time just to process it a little bit, or, reflect on it, some of these ideas in some way.
Thank you, Ilia, so much for that presentation. Very stimulating, challenging, and hopeful. And you've given us a lot to consider. We're going to take some time now to have questions coming from the audience. And for those who'd like to raise a question, in the bottom line of computers, at least, the desktops, there is a react option among the little tools of Zoom. If you click on that, one of the possibilities is to raise your hand. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use that method, and that will put you in the queue so we can see and recognize you. Okay, so people are beginning to do that. And the first person is Susan Izzard.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I tried to speak to you last week. I'm a spiritual director. I'm also a retired UCC minister, and I've been a mystic since I was tiny. But the question I have for you, I guess, is, about mission, because the church isn't the mission anymore. It seems to me the mission is this inner journey that is what we are about as spiritual directors, that has taught us to listen for something that's much bigger than anything we were ever raised to know. And this last fall, I sat next to my mother, who was a scientist as she died. She never lost her brain. She had very acute knowledge and understanding. And a few days before she died, I walked into her room. She was completely gone by that time. But when I walked into her room and I said, "Hi, Mom," she turned to me, and she hadn't moved in a couple of days, but she turned to me, she turned her head, and she lifted her hands up, and she said, "Susan, I hold the beginning and the end in the palm of my hands, and I want you to hold it too."
Mm.
And those were the last words she said to me.
Wow.
And I think the thing that struck me about this, because she lived her faith, but she never spoke of her faith, she allowed me to be the theologian and the mystic, was that in this deathbed moment, and she'd said a lot of other things too, like, "Isn't this wonderful? It's marvelous. Don't you smell the flowers? Can you hear the music?" All kinds of things. But in this deathbed moment, she became this mystic of inner knowing. And it seems to me that we know this because of contemplative prayer. And as a result of that, we have this new mission for who we are as God's people. And that a place like the Spiritual Life Center here in Hartford is a visionary space for that. And I guess what I'm asking you is, because, your ideas are big, they're complicated, they're intense, right? The average layperson, it's hard to grasp all that you've heard. I mean, I've been a minister and a preacher for my life, and I know that. I guess the question is, where's the guidance for everyday folk who have a hard time with the beginning and the end in the palm of their hands?
Yeah, I think the guidance actually, well, it does come from first attentiveness to the within, in other words, an awareness of life itself. I think that it begins rather simply. For Teilhard, it began with the touch of a tree or touch of a rock, the touch of the earth itself. And sometimes you don't, funny enough, Teilhard was not an abstract thinker. He was a very concrete thinker. So, it's in the concreteness. So it's like we hold, whether we meet a person or we hold a leaf in our hands, I think it's coming to that place within us that can recognize in that which is being held a depth, the wonder of it, the awesomeness of life itself. And I think, one thing is living life as an awesome journey. It just, it's wondrous. Life is sort of miraculous on every level. The fact that we, even though we fail a lot of the times, we keep getting up and we start new. So there's something about us. And I think being attentive to the fact that things can fail, people die, but life goes on in a new way. And that's what also drew Teilhard. It's the newness of life. And it can be as simple as going outside and just seeing something in a familiar setting that you've never seen before. So even though my ideas are big because they're put into big paradigms, they're actually quite simple. I mean, actually the whole story is rather simple. It maybe simple for me because I've been doing this for a while. But one thing maybe I would refrain against and this is what Teilhard, the withinness is the withoutness. I think that's the part that he really emphasized, that matter itself has a withinness and a withoutness, and that it's what's operating on the within that influences what takes place in the without. And all I was trying to say is that the disconnects we find today are symptomatic of a disconnect between withinness and withoutness. And that's, in a sense, what we're trying to understand. Where did we become disconnected? And what role has religion played in the disconnect? And what role can it play, or spirituality, in the reconnectedness? And by connectedness, here's what I see with people who aren't even religious, and that would be in the technology sphere. It's the freedom to enter into the deeper depths of mind, the place of imagination. How far can we imagine what this world, if I were to ask you, what do you imagine the earth can look like, say, in 20 or 30 years? What are you what are you hoping for? And what would it look like? What's going on? And that's where I think we need to, I think sometimes traditional religion, it hasn't suppressed, but it hasn't invited us to deep imagination, to deep creativity. And that's what I think we just invite, and help people enter into. God is not a God of judgment and, all this stuff. God is a God of freedom. God is a God of creativity. That's the whole idea, is like, God loves creativity. It's like, what are you doing? It's just, you're kind of like doing the same old thing over and over. And so I think, as we get older, sometimes it can go either way. We can either settle in, like we found our happy spot, on our favorite chair, or, in the favorite part of the house, and we like to just settle there. Or, I'd like to look at, I think we're kind of ageless, and how wherever we find ourselves in this moment, what is it we can give ourselves to wholeheartedly, like in this moment, throw yourselves with passion into it, and that's the thing, live passionately. We don't live passionately enough. That's what he means by a zest of life. So, I know you're a spiritual director, and you have to give people some guidance. I would suggest, honestly, Lou Savory has some wonderful books on simplifying Teilhard de Chardin for the spiritual life. They're really worth looking at, and he's much more, point by point by point than I am. Mm-hmm. He can give you clear points on how to enter into Teilhard's world of vision. But the old adage, let go, let God.
Mm-hmm.
As simple as that.
I see Mary Espinoza has a hand up.
Hello. I don't have a question so much as the feathery edges of an observation. I was picking up threads of what you were saying that reminded me a lot of the theologian James Allison's thought, and in particular the part where he talks about the sideways God who wants to be with us, is not above us, that is curious to be with us and to see our creativity. And really, coming out of the resurrection, we're kind of being punted into the era, the age of the Spirit, and that God is opening up a lot for us, and that we have barely scratched the surface of what the Holy Spirit could open up for us. So I was just sort of picking up feather edges of convergence there.
Yeah, those are great insights, Mary. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And I do think we are in the age, if you want to use that language, the age of the Spirit. It's the age of energy, really. And we have to think of it in spiritual energy. And we might think of it, the energy that animates us, that gives us life, and that energy is God. We don't speak of God as energy, but we could speak of God as God energy.
And even the line where Jesus says, "You will do more than I do." I mean, he sees that as Jesus just beginning to open the door and go for it. And I am with you as a sideways God, not for an over you God.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, Jesus. I mean, Jesus did recognize the limits of his own earthly life, and saying that the Spirit will come, the Spirit will lead you to that fullness of truth. And therefore, I think the early Christians, they kind of lived in that spirit, and then that spirit got politicized and then institutionalized, and then we had other things going on there. But yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, we need to do more than Jesus. Like, what does that look like? I mean, and therefore, I think we can never think too wide. We can never think too Jesus was an upstart. So what would it be for us to really do some wild and crazy things, as spiritual people? What would that look like to be really wild and crazy?
An example that he gives, he's a gay theologian, and he's speaks around the world, and he mentions, if you want to say wild and crazy things in a certain sense, in the Central African area where being gay is outlawed, even to the point of being something that you can have capital punishment for. He has seen communities of gays do some very interesting things of getting out of the country and commute and creating refuges in nearby countries. That that in one way sounds like, well, yeah, sort of, but there was a way that was a breaking out of that terrible persecution. And he'd seen a lot of creativity about how they did it with very few human material resources.
Yeah, that's great, Mary. And just to highlight, because we have some other questions here, but it's breaking. So it's where we can cross the boundaries. Where the boundaries to be stretched or crossed into something new. That's the new is always, in a sense, a leaving behind, what's already known. And that's what technology does. Technology changes boundaries. How does spirituality change boundaries? That's our question.
Thank you. Yes. Celeste.
I was a couple of things occurred to me. The first thing is that as you were talking about the technocrats, and I was feeling more and more overwhelmed, and my natural inclination is to say, well, wait a minute. And when I said that, I thought that there are more of us than ever, I believe, in the world that are engaged in contemplation. And are engaged in those kinds of inner contemplative spiritual practices. And it's all over the world. It's not just in one little place. And by being engaged, we're not engaged within the confines of any particular religion, but it's almost the opposite. It's the kind of thing that unites us all. Because we're all basically saying the same thing because our experiences are similar. And one of the questions that I had is how to use technology to further the cause of spreading the word about contemplation. These are some of the things that I think about because I see technology like any tool as a means to an end to enable us to do more than we could without it. But the person who's doing the thing is going to be the driver. Do you see what I'm saying? It's kind of like, it reminds me of what Emerson said when, of course, the new technology was the telegraph. And he said, you know, it's amazing that, you know, America can communicate with Europe immediately, but perhaps America has nothing new to communicate. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like the issue is the technology is simply a tool. And how can we use that for the ends of what we're doing here?
So yes, Liz, I appreciate what you're saying. Now, let me just two things. One, what if you were to think about contemplation as a type of technology? In other words, if technology is the shaping of energy or, you know, or materials towards something of optimal life, then
Okay.
contemplation is, in a sense, a tool, a method that's shaping spiritual energy towards
Yes.
goal. So, you know, that would be one thing, is that technology is actually changing. So contemplation as a technology is
Yes.
changing us.
Yes.
Same way that computer technology is also changing us. And maybe one of the things is, how can contemplation and computer technology, how could they work together?
Exactly. Yes.
That's what you're getting at. And
Yes.
that's a really good pursuit, actually. That's a good way. That is what Teilhard was thinking about when he spoke about a new religion of the earth. Like, people are all over the world, you know, involved in
Yes.
contemplation.
And do you think any of that's happening already in terms of I mean, these are the things that I notice about technology is to way to connect with other people who are similarly spiritually oriented.
Yes, but that's step number one. But then the second step is, if there's so what you're building is a collective consciousness
Yes.
through contemplation, right?
Yes.
You're tapping into a deep spiritual center that everyone is sharing in some deep way, right? And therefore, how would you access that spiritual power to do new things in the world? Like, what would that mean collectively in terms of, oh, I don't know, how would you creatively engage? That's what we mean by the next steps of technology. It's constantly imagining. And so I would invite, you know, in this realm of contemplation, that it opens up to the infinite, you know, that it opens up to infinite possibilities.
Right.
As we're always moving from the self to the more self, to the ultimate self, to the no self, to the self that's a collective self.
Yes.
So I think, so all I want to say is, we sell ourselves too short sometimes. We stop when we're just getting started. And I would encourage you to keep in that. That's excellent, though. I really like what you're doing there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. James?
Hi, great. I mean, I just loved your talk. I just love your talk. One question, you talked about cyborgs. And, you know, I find that terrifying, because who's going to program the stuff that gets implanted?
This is a problem, actually, because as what I see happening, and this is a huge discussion, you know, among scholars, technology is advancing at such a fast rate. Robots will be, you know, in a sense, fixing us, etc. Our ethical guidelines, our boundaries. Where do we draw the line here? And that's what, when I say religion needs to be part of this conversation, we need to step up and say, you know, as humans, this is what is precious to us. And we will not sell ourselves out to robots. You know, we may have robots to help, but like, I like Siri, you know, she's very helpful on the weather. But I do not want, you know, for example, a robot replacing me, or, you know, my implantable device is connected to my robotic partner. that there's no aim, and a lot of technology literally has no ethical boundaries. It's just we can do it, and so we're going to make it. We have the money to make it. We're going to make it, and that's the problem. It's just sort of on this freeway of just endless development. But we need a counter argument or a counter narrative, and that's why I'm saying religious people have to be as innovative as well as the technology people. We can't be too reticent or just too passive and just accept everything that's coming our way. If we treasure what we're about and what God is about and what spirituality is about, well, why not harness that which we treasure and maximize its potential for what we can become together, what this planet can become? That's why we have work to do. That's basically what I'm saying. We can't just can't wait for Silicon Valley to tell us what to do. We need to take, you might say, responsibility for the powers that are already within us, that power of God.
Thank you.
Olga.
Thank you. Can entanglement through contemplative energy reach the suffering across the world for healing?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, Olga. I do believe that. So I think the suffering of the world is somehow related. We are related to it. And in some ways, I think we're part of it. And I think that's why we need to constantly be attentive to how we are, how we act, the choices we make, the words we use, etc. But can contemplative prayer? Yes, I think prayer is I think it sets up an energy field. I think that's what prayer does. And I think that energy field can be tapped into by others in the world. It can affect others. Last week, I had a slide that said, if you pick a flower on Earth, you can move the farthest star. It's the same idea that when we tap into that source of power of love, within us, we then influence, we share that love, we energize that love for those in the world. So I do think prayer has a power to affect lives. And so to answer your question, I would say yes, it can. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we're going to have Mark in just a second, but I see we could use a few more questions, so I encourage others to get into the queue. But Mark? Whoops, Mark disappeared. Well, I have one that I'd like to ask. I take your points very much. I think that there's a lot of our system, our way of being and valuing that may be influenced heavily by the past and perhaps not helpfully. But I'm also hearing in what you're saying something about the human heart, the deep values, the right side of the brain type of things that seems to need to be continued to be brought forward and not just left in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Might you say anything more about that?
Yes, I think that's true. I think the past gives us a sense of comfort or a sense of groundedness of some sort, that we have lived through, what was, and God has seen us through, and this idea. So the right brain, is really the brain of passion and creativity and that deep connectivity. The way I think of past, by the way, is by way of emergence. So emergence is what is taken up in a new way, and that's what I think actually tradition is. I don't think the tradition is looking to the past. I think it's taking the core values, and they're taken up in a new way and illuminated for where we find ourselves today. That they have value, but the value is only valuable if they mean something for us in our own lives. Again, I think thinking past, present, future, I think there's a lot of fear today, if I can say that. I think there's tremendous fear. And I think the past sort of gives us a sense of grounding. When we feel it's all becoming ungrounded and, the world might end in any second, the past just helps us, it kind of slows us down a little bit and helps us feel like it'll be okay. We've been here before, idea. But I want us to get over that deep fear. There's nothing to fear, really, except for fear itself. I think when we, going back to contemplative prayer, when we tap into or enter into that wellspring of love within us, the more we can enter into that power of divine love, the freer we will become, the more we will have, in a sense, the courage and the imagination to look to the future with a new vision. So just want to put that out there as well. So I see, Mark, you're back on here. And then Marissa.
Just hearing you say that God, the entanglement, we are entangled with God. There is an entanglement, number one. In my head, in my training, in my study, it seems limiting. And I know that's not what you're saying. So I need to have a new way to hear that, number one. Number two, I'll say the church, I'll say Christianity has been at the forefront thousands of years ago with art and science and music. Can we not reclaim that? Again, using the concept of the past somehow becomes tilled into the present.
Yes.
And we move out. Is that a possibility? And there was a third thing, but it's gone out of my mind. So I will let you comment on those two.
Those are good points. So the first one, is entanglement with God limiting to God? That's what I'm taking your question. Do we limit God? So when we say that God needs us or that God is entangled with us, Whitehead spoke of God as dipolar. He said one pole of God is just pure mystery, like it's beyond our reach, right? And yet there's another side of God that's completely involved in us, what he called the consequential nature, the consequent nature. And so if we say that God is dependent on us, we never exhaust God. We never can, God is never becoming anything other than God, and yet there's something about God, especially if God is love. Love needs to be actualized. It can't, otherwise it just remains as an idea, the idea of love. And so by actualizing that love, of divine love, we bring God into a new reality, that God shines forth in us in a new way. So that, in a sense, God becomes God by becoming more deeply in love, God in love. So that would be one thing. And then about the past, in terms of, yes, the Catholic Church was, in Christendom, art, music, that is how the laity learned the faith, because they were illiterate, literally. They did not know Latin. And so they learned the things of God in scripture by looking at stained glass windows and singing church songs. I think there's a place for art and music in ritual and worship. I think it's a wonderful, it brings out different aspects of us. Does it have to be, and here's what I want to just kind of provoke us to think bigger. Like, does it have to be, limited to the church? Could we think then about new music, new art forms, new rituals that might include, we know so much more about the world today than ever before. Our connectivity to the earth, the way the earth itself comes about. So why not sing and give praise and ritualize and celebrate this in the ways that we actually know about and can empower us towards deeper relatedness and a visionary future. So I think the old worked, for the old, and now it can work somewhat, but we need to find our own way in our own time.
Thank you. Marisa.
Thank you. So I'm struggling a little bit with some of the concepts in this way. If we say that human is in some ways, and our ability to self-recognize and observe our own thinking is a way that God has achieved a certain level of manifestation. What worries me about centralizing that, in some of the presentation tonight, it still feels like humanity is centralized in the evolution of God or the creation. And that really bothers me because we are so small in the universe, and there's got to be forms of being that is not limited like us. And so we're leaving that out of a cosmology that we're talking about tonight in a way. At least that's what I'm hearing. And when we think of God within what frightens me about AI taking over and technology as being the global network, let's say, that expands our consciousness, is that it's still a creation of our limited minds. And when I have mystical experience, I have knowingness that far exceeds the limits of my thoughts, far exceeds the limits of my thoughts. And so if technology, which is born from our thinking and our intellect, it seems to me, is the primary way we think we are evolving, that frightens me because I think it leaves out all the rest. So I just wanted, it may be that I'm still thinking in concepts that are different from how you are thinking and hearing something limited, but please could you speak on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of, God, in a sense, being an outflow of our coming to an awareness of a power that exceeds us, yet at the heart of our lives. While I hear, in a sense, if it seems anthropocentric, it is only because we ourselves are conscious beings, and I don't know about other conscious beings out there who may or may not have a capacity for God or an experience of God. I can't speak of anything that I myself am not. So whether or not that's true, that could well be. So I don't think, and when we talk about the human, I think this is really important because it's why I keep showing the diagrams. It's not that we are the great exception to the cosmos. It is that we are the cosmos. We are that universe now on the level of self-consciousness. In other words, each person is the thinking portion of the universe. There's no like universe out there that we belong to. We are it. And I think that's the part that, so when you have an experience, a mystical experience that exceeds, the bounds of humanness, is because you're tapping into probably a much deeper realm of consciousness that is really at the heart of cosmic life itself. And so that's the whole thing. Like we are all that. We are all cosmic life on the level of the personal, but most people, live at a certain level, a lower level of consciousness. And so we're always acting out of the more individual or personal level, almost to the unawareness of the cosmic level of things. But in reality, if you follow our story from nature, we are the universe. That is it. So anthropocentrism itself is a misguided term. It's only because it's an artificial term. We create an anthropocentrism when we live out of superficial levels of consciousness or just divide ourselves consciously from material world. So that would be, so I don't know. I mean, are there other forms of life, of consciousness? I actually think there probably are, for sure. Can we tap into them? Yes, if we come to deeper level, much deeper levels. I mean, consciousness is the word itself doesn't really get to what this incredible phenomenon that is the basis of probably life itself, probably more fundamental than gravity, is consciousness. And so the other thing about technology is that, yes, this is what I'm trying to say. What if we were to tap into those deeper levels of consciousness and therefore from those levels imagine what the world can become, and therefore create the structures for that new becoming of world. So whatever we're tapping into is not for ourselves alone. And that's the thing, is we don't live for ourselves, we live for the whole. And therefore we must be for that whole. And that's where I think sometimes we're living too small, too narrow, too individual. And technology is like, well, we'll create something new, and I think technology is incredible because we're creating this stuff out of what? Out of our imagination, out of our apparent infinite ability to, what does it mean to be human? It means to imagine what doesn't exist and to bring it into existence. That's the mark of being human. And there's something about technology that is deeply human in this way, but it's unguided. It's sort of misguided. It's all over the place, quite honestly. And that's what makes it rather scary for us. Yeah. So.
Thank you. Do you have time for one more?
One more.
All right. Lizanne?
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for these past 2 evenings. And my question is about something you just said a little while ago when you were talking about prayer. Because I'm sort of confused in my own mind about prayer, but what you said that I really love is that prayer sets up an energy field, and that prayer has the power to affect life. And I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about how you think about prayer, like not contemplative prayer. I don't know what kind of prayer you were talking about, contemplative prayer, but I have trouble with intercessory prayer. Like when people say, I'll pray for you. I mean, I'm just interested in what your thoughts are.
Yeah.
How you think that might work, which sounds like a very naive question, but.
That's fine. Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful human. The intercessory prayer of deep, it expresses to us a sense of connectivity. Like you're not here alone. You're not in whatever you're suffering or whatever you're going through, you're not alone. Like that prayer, like I'll pray for you, is I am kind of, even in spirit, even in thought, I'm united with you, so that my life and my thoughts and my energies are somehow therefore will affect yours, that you will not be isolated, cut off, abandoned in whatever you're going through. So I think intercessory prayer is just giving expression to our longing for deep connectivity and interconnectedness. And it says we belong to a power of love together, that there's something more here. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at here, is there's a moreness to life that our modern world has literally excised, and we have, if we know it, we have therefore an invitation to reclaim it and to live out of its deeper energy. Intercessory prayer is, I think it's a great way of solidarity, quite honestly. I think one of the greatest sufferings of our time is aloneness. People feel alone. They feel cut off. Does anyone care if I die? If I choke to death? If I fall asleep and never wake up? Will anyone even notice that I'm gone? And that's, we've created a society. Sherry Turkle wrote the book Alone Together. Alone Together. Why we expect more from our technologies and less from one another. I mean, that's a really telling book.
Yeah.
And so intercessory prayers is saying we're not alone, and we are together in this. I may not be able to fix you or heal you, but I'm here with you, and that alone, that knowing that you are not alone is itself healing. It's a healing energy.
Yeah, it's very powerful. That's thank you for a beautiful answer for me. Thank you so much.
All right. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ilia. You've given us a tremendous amount to consider, reflect upon. I'm sure we'll be doing that for quite some time to come. And we're just so grateful that you make time to be with us and share more of your perspectives and your spirit. So thank you for that.
Oscar, I just want to mention that if you go to Christogenesis, .org. There's a lot of, you can find a lot of YouTubes of me as well. I mean, all that I'm saying here is all on the website in various ways. Oh, I also want to just mention our Christophany groups. We have small discussion groups, and maybe that's something you could think about at Hartford Internationals, creating small discussion groups, because these are big ideas and they're not easily digestible, in one sitting. But what Christophany, we have about 26 of them around the world. And people are beginning to take these ideas and meet regularly once a month or so and just talk together about processing these ideas for where we find ourselves and what they mean for us. Yeah.